Welcome to Teacher Talk Radio. Today you're with your hosts, Krupa and Nazya, for your Sunday lunch. Earlier this week, we met with a wonderful practitioner named Mariam Khan on all things early years.
Stay tuned to listen in.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your Sunday lunch with Nazya and Krupa. It has been an exceptional week this week. We have had lots of networking events happening. We've been catching up with some really key practitioners, but today is all about one particular practitioner. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Mariam Khan to begin with. And I'm going to share her thoughts around all things early years. Now, I myself am from a secondary background, both mainstream and special, and listening to Mariam this week as an early years practitioner, sharing her world was so engaging, and it really has got me thinking about how we can and should be spending more time thinking about other phases that we work in.
So I think let's just get to it, maybe.
Should we do it?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So we're going to play the recording of our interview, and then we will be sharing our thoughts. And as usual, we'll be ending with I Wish I Knew Earlier and our Serenity Sunday moment. So stay tuned.
Hey. Welcome, Mariam. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Really well, thank you. And Nazya's here too. So, hi, Nazya. How are you?
Hi, Krupa. Hi, Mariam. Hope everyone's
Hi,
well.
Nazya.
Super. Okay, so today's show is actually really, really exciting. We have Mariam Khan here, who is going to be talking to us about the early years, the journey throughout that she has had, but also why she's so passionate about early years. So Mariam, first and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me here. I feel very honored to be here. So I'll wind it all the way back to 2014. I was working at Heathrow Airport, early shifts. It was such a drag at the time, and I just remember always having at the back of my mind the fact that I'm quite studious, I love studying, but I'm not doing it, and that combined with the fact that I'm good with children, when you have nieces and nephews and you find you're really good with them, but it's not just, oh, play with them for a bit or do a bit of work with them and that makes you good. There was always that extra something about it that I picked up on. So eventually I went with my gut instinct and I decided to pursue a degree in English literature, and then went on to do the PGCE, all whilst working in both mainstream and independent schools, and then been working for the last 5 years as a qualified teacher, was a teaching assistant before that, and I've only recently completed my master's in education as well. So that's where I'm currently at, and I'm currently a reception class teacher. I've been across Key Stage 1. I've also worked in Year 3. But my passion, as you said, is in the early years when children are aged 4 and 5 before they move into the primary stages.
Okay, so Mariam, that's quite a big jump from working at Heathrow. Were you a flight attendant, or were you working at
I
Heathrow?
wish. No, I was. It wasn't as glamorous as that. It was giving all the glamorous rich people their tax refund at 4:30 in the morning. So it was quite gloomy. We're looking back. Waking up at that time, that hour, 3 o'clock in the morning. The only good side to that was finishing at 1 o'clock and not having work to take home.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was actually just giving tax refunds to all
Yeah,
the
I mean, do you know,
millionaires and rich people.
whenever anyone to says that they worked at the airport or worked for like an airline or something, I just get super jealous. I don't know why it is.
No.
It just naturally
I
happens.
mean, I'm sure there's
First
aspects.
question. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Miriam.
I'm sure there's aspects that come across more glamorous than what I was doing. I feel like all the people I was giving money to were the glamorous ones, and I was just there giving them the money. So, yeah, not
Yeah.
glamorous on my part.
Yeah. So, yeah, and do you know what it is? A lot of the times when people, I've met so many people who moved into teaching. So they, like Krupa, you went into teaching from your degree, didn't you?
So I did
Yeah,
my degree was in biology and nutrition, and then I did my PGCE,
yeah,
and then that's it. It was, but it wasn't my first intention to go into education to begin with.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's incredible,
yeah,
really, really interesting,
yeah. And
Mariam, really interesting.
Yeah.
it's so in, yeah, and I was a software engineer before I came into teaching. It's so odd,
Wow.
isn't it? Yeah, it's so odd. Like, and do you know what is? A lot of people I've met actually used to have another career before they came into teaching. And I think, I don't know why that happened. I know why it happened for me, but Mariam, what was the hook for you to going to work into working, changing your career and working in early years?
So, although like early years is where my passion lies, when I was an NQT, or they call it an ECT now, but I was actually put into year three. So it was a big jump from like early years and key stage one straight into lower key stage two. Um, but what hooked me onto the early years is the fact that there's less structure. I feel like there's less time constraints. You're teaching maths and literacy, but you're teaching it in a variety of ways. You're following children's interests rather than schemes of work all the time. There's more leeway with planning lessons. And it's that I just love the fact that they're 4 and 5 years old. They always have such interesting stories to tell as little children. And you're there nurturing that. You're nurturing their personalities, their mannerism, just the way they carry themselves. And I feel like that's what really stands out to me, just the fact that I'm part of their first steps in the school system.
Did you find that there was like your natural tendencies was to work with the youngsters over and above some of the older students? Is
Yeah,
that
I would say I think I was slightly influenced by the fact that I had nieces and nephews at home who were that age, so I had a better indication of what children that age are like. And I was kind of drawn into that misconception that, oh, as children get older, their behavior drops and, the attitude and things like this changes. I mean, I'm more than open to working in other year groups, but for me, early years just always stood out. There's always that little extra something. And when I did start off as a early years key worker in 2014, I was in reception. So maybe I'm biased a little bit based on my first experience. But yeah,
Mhm.
early years is definitely for me.
I love that. You know what's really interesting is I have a 5-year-old myself, and I think 30 of my young person is a challenge. So I have to say kudos and huge respect, Mariam, the fact that you are willing and wanting and have this real passion for having such small bodies,
Mm.
Yeah.
big minds, and they are discovering and they've got great personalities. You're quite right, but all at the same time and all day really is a task. And I think we shouldn't shy away from saying that. Like
Yeah,
it's it's a long day. It
Mm.
really is, isn't it?
it
Yeah,
is. And that transition is is a lot for them. Like you
Yeah.
the amount of things you have to consider. I think there was a study recently that said like teachers make more decisions than was it what was it, surgeons or like brain surgeons. There was a whole study. I don't want to, don't quote me on that, but there was a study about the number of decisions that teachers have to make and how it's way more than any other profession. You might I'm not sure of the exact statistics, but it's definitely there.
Send it through to us and we can bring that back to conversation, because I think that's
Mm,
I think you're quite right when you say that,
yeah.
education and whichever year group you're in, there is, you're constantly thinking about what has happened, what's currently happening, and what's going to happen next, and that's always happening
Mm,
for every learner, all at the same time. And actually with you, I think you've also got some of the learners that you work with haven't had exposure to nursery.
yeah.
You've got a real vast sort of range of young people. So you've got some that
Yeah.
have the private nursery, some that have gone to to the local nurse, part-time nurses, are all starting at very different starting points.
Yeah, and also you tend to get a lot of children, especially in the borough that I work in at the moment, a lot of children coming from abroad who have never been to school, or they've been in a country where the setting was completely different to here. So getting them to adjust to that is, yeah, like we've had Ukraine, Pakistan, India, Saudi Arabia, and they're all so different in how they do things. So those children coming here, it's a whole clean slate for them.
And but also they're also coming in with trauma at such a young age.
Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
so hard to swallow. They're so tender, they're so young, and then they come to you who's really vibrant and passionate, and you're trying to navigate actually that really fine line between supporting a young person that's gone through this traumatic experience
Yeah,
and belonging and safety, and then you've got another child that's has all of that and is presenting. I'm by the way, I'm assuming quite differently. So
yeah,
wow, fascinating.
Um, do you know what I really like? I really like the what you were saying about, how there's lots more leeway and less structure and things like that, because
yeah,
that just really entices me. Just the thought of that is that flex and that flexibility. But
yeah.
yeah, we're heading to a break and we'll continue this conversation um straight after. See you in a bit.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that 1 in 3 primary schools has no male teachers. The study by the Warwick Business School says the proportion of schools without a male classroom teacher has increased in the last 12 months. The report's author, Dr. Joshua Fullard, said the lack of male teachers was bad for pupils. Dr. Fullard is Assistant Professor of Behavioural Science at Warwick Business School. He went on to say that there is a large body of research that shows students benefit from being educated by a teacher with certain similarities to them. The report also found that schools in special measures are less likely to have a male classroom teacher. In total, the report found that 24.3% of all state schools in England had no male classroom teachers. The report called for teachers' pay to be raised by more than 10% and for a merit-based reduction in tuition fees for university-led teacher training to be introduced. Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy for ASCL Union, said more needed to be done to attract men and women alike, and a spokesperson for the DfE said the department wanted the profession to be inclusive. North East Child Poverty Commission website reports that new figures published by the DfE confirm that more than 3 in 10 pupils across the North East are now registered for free school meals. This is an increase from January 2022. It remains the highest proportion of any part of England. The figure of 30.4% is compared with 18.8% of pupils in the South East and 19.4% in the East of England. The England-wide rate is 23.8%. All regions have seen a significant increase in the number and share of children eligible for free school meals over the last 7 years. The Guardian reports children's enjoyment of writing has fallen to crisis point, following research completed by the National Literacy Trust. The charity says an alarmingly low level of children and young people enjoy writing. The research was conducted across the UK. 34.6% of young people aged 8 to 18 said that they enjoy writing in their free time. Although 3 in 4 children starting school said that they enjoyed writing, this dropped to 1 in 4 by the age of 16. The Children's and Young People's Writing Report is drawn from over 70,000 responses from children to the charity's annual literacy survey. The number of children who say they enjoy writing in their free time has dropped by 12.2% in the 30 years since the survey began. Young people do report that they write to improve mental health and well-being and to support causes or issues they care about. Full details can be found on the National Literacy Trust website. Finally, Microsoft News reports that Taiwan has made the move to use generative artificial intelligence, or AI, to help students learn English. Teachers in the country often report that students read and write better than they speak English, as shyness and a lack of practice can hinder oral communication. A new chatbot has been funded by Taiwan's Ministry of Education to help pupils get the practice they need. The Coolie bot allows pupils to speak person to AI and build up conversation on preset topics. It also assesses punctuation, accuracy, and fluency. Taiwan has set a goal of becoming bilingual in Chinese and English by 2030. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to ask you a question. Do you use presentation software to help you deliver your lessons? 99% of you will be saying yes at this point. Have you ever considered how many presentations the average pupil in your school sees in a day, in a week, or even in their entire school life? Considering a typical secondary education, with a bit of rough maths, over a week with 5 lessons a day, there's potential to see 25 presentations. That's 100 presentations in just 4 weeks. I've left out any additional presentations like assemblies and visitors, etc. Working on a 38-week year, that's a whopping 950 presentations a year. That's a lot of presentations. Now, let's throw in some schools have a standardized slide theme and set layouts. Now we have 950 exactly the same lesson beginnings. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but do we really know what experience a pupil gets through a typical week in school? Are they being engaged, or are they being presented with the same visual stimulus day in, day out, simply causing them to fly below the radar? If you're like me, you're now thinking, how do I make my presentation stand out? Is there a presentation software out there that's better than all the rest? In my humble opinion, this is like the visualizer versus HD webcam argument. What works for some does not work for others because all subjects are not the same, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but please bear in mind that what works for one teacher may not work for another. A search for free presentation software returns no less than 24 apps I recognise. Some are interactive like Mentimeter, others have more dynamic transitions like Prezi. Most also have additional features and add-ons you can purchase. I know what you're saying, come on Steve, which is the best though? Well, the answer is simple, but I've run out of time, so I'll have to tell you next week. In the meantime, please consider the number of presentations a typical pupil is subjected to in your school. Does this need to change, or does it work? And how do you know? Do you have a preferred presentation software, and what are the features that make it stand out for you? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Mariam, it's been a beautiful start, and just hearing your passion about early years and your journey so far has been really insightful. So I'm going to jump straight in and ask you, we've heard some of the interest and I guess that the changes that has happened. So what's the best thing about working in early years?
Okay, for me personally, the best thing is I feel there is more room for creativity. So, I was saying there's less structure. Because of that, I feel like it allows you to be as creative as you like. You get to teach inside the classroom, you can go outdoors, there's learn through play. So you can, there's just so much leeway for creativity each and every single day, no matter what it is you're teaching. The second thing that really appeals to me is the fact that that is the starting stone for building relationships with parents. So those parents usually stay throughout the schooling years all the way to year six. But you're the one that sort of starting off that relationship, building that bond, building that relationship between the parent and the school and bringing that together. But what really stands out to me is that I feel like because there's more time in the early years, you're not faced with time constraints to fit everything of the curriculum in all the time. You really get to know each child as an individual based on their interests. So a lot of the learning that you plan follows what the children are interested in, whether it's dinosaurs or princesses or princes or the royal family or castles or whatever it is that the children like, you are following based on their interests and planning according to that. So that really stands out to me. And you know what? One thing I've realized throughout all these years is you can actually learn so much from the children rather than being the one to teach them. So they might only be 4 or 5 years old, but through their like behavioral cues, the way they may say something, the way they might word something, the way certain actions they might use, they're actually teaching you so much about themselves and their behavior, whether they're happy with something, whether they're not. And that's pretty amazing to me for kids to be able to do that at such a young age. And the last thing I will say, and I think this is a misconception a lot of people have, for me, the fact that reading and writing actually starts in reception and not year one, and you see that writing and reading of that children do flourish throughout the year, that for me is like the biggest win. That's where they learn their sounds. That's where they learn to segment and blend. That is when they learn to use their sounds to start writing sentences, stories, and so on. Not year one. So I feel like early years has so much to offer. It's just there's not that level of awareness that there should be about it.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally agree. I love my nephew. He's well, he's 6 now. But I remember when he's I think he's moved into year 1 now. But when he was
Yeah.
in reception before that, reception falls into early years, doesn't it?
Yes. Nursery and reception.
Yeah.
So anything between 0 and 5.
Right, yeah. So I remember when he was doing his phonics and things. It was the cutest thing
Yeah.
ever. But now he's just turned 6. He's so good at reading. You know, the other day we went to a restaurant and he was reading things off the menu. That's amazing. I was just like shocked.
And that's what I mean. The fact that he's reading things off a menu, there's purpose to it. He's not just read like there's no rote reading involved. He's reading because he enjoys it and he has the ability to do so, and he chose to do that. That's
And
amazing.
and I think that ties in beautifully when you say that they are when you talk about the learners being able to recognize their feelings and they're able to develop that sort of that personal part of it, and actually you can see how beautifully that's so important for them to then be ready for the learning. So
Yeah.
while you're sort of meandering and you're carving and you're making space for them to be, you're also seeing the little hooks that's going to enable them to grow, if that makes sense. And that's what I'm gauging,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. So it's really tender time. But I'm also thinking I mean, even when they're nursery to reception, that's a significant jump.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
again, you go
And
through
I
another.
find it's quite significant because a lot of the children have English as an additional language. So for them, that's when they're picking up on English in nursery and in reception. All that vocabulary, building sentences, all of that comes from the early years.
Yeah, no, and you know what else actually is one of the best things about working in early years? And I only know this because actually, this is when I was doing my PGCE. We had to do some work experience prior to the PGCE. It was like a prerequisite, and I ended up working at a school, and there, so I was given some experience working in year 6 and all the way down to reception. I was a complete stranger, and these kids were sharing with me like what they do at home and what happens at home, and I was like, should you be telling me? I was like, obviously in my 20s, I was like, should you be telling me this? Because it was like you get an insight to what happens at home. But they're
They're
just
very
so
honest,
open.
aren't they?
But they're so open.
They
I'm a
are.
stranger. I'm only in the class for 3 days. But yeah. Is that what do you find that, Mariam?
Sorry, find what?
That the young people are so open. The children are so open. They just
Very, very open. They'll tell you anything and everything about their weekend, about their whole life. Literally, they'll just blurt it out. You're sitting on the carpet in the middle of a maths lesson, and they'll be like, "My mum this, my dad this, my grandma this, or I went here," and it's like, okay, there's a time and place for that. We're doing maths right now, but you can tell me
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, I went to
Yeah.
my son's this was a while ago. I went to his at the parents' day when he was in reception, and with the the teacher said to me, "Oh yeah, your son told us about that you guys went out and got dressing gowns and you got like and the colors each of you got for your dressing." And I was like, "Okay,
Yeah.
Mohammed, that's not something you share." Anyway, so
Brilliant.
yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So, Mariam, what
yeah.
difficulties and challenges have you come across in the early years? Now, bearing in mind, when you first go into any kind of new role, the challenges and barriers you face then are not necessarily the barriers and
Yes.
barriers you face later on, or the challenges you face later on. So, do you want to like talk through the whole generally, like when you first started
Yeah,
out?
I'll give you an overview of
Yeah.
like the sort of challenges I've faced in almost every early year setting I've been
Yeah.
in, or I've been told about, or I've come across. So the
Yeah.
first one I would say is often being overlooked as a phase. So by that I mean there's that misconception that we're just playing with the children all the time. You hear it a lot, oh, but you guys just play with the kids. Like that's all you're doing. So it can be quite disheartening to hear that, if I'm honest. Like we're not babysitters. We're not there to babysit the children. We are there to nurture the children and teach them in the same way that the rest of the primary and secondary school teachers do. So that's one of the difficulties, a personal difficulty, I would say, that I've faced quite a lot. I also find that, when it comes to the end of year or even throughout the year, when it comes to trips and workshops, you'll always hear, oh, Key Stage 1, this is for you. Key Stage 2, this is for you. Oh, early years, it's not suitable for you. It's not age appropriate or it's not aimed at you. So you tend to miss out on a lot of opportunities. Even when you're booking a trip to go on, a lot of settings will say, oh, it's for Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2 or 5 and above. So that means a lot of your children that are in reception or nursery won't be included in that, so they won't get to go. So you're often overlooked in terms of trips and workshops. One really big factor that I'd want to touch on is early intervention. So nursery and reception tend to be the years where you get a lot of special um, educational needs children coming in. Um, and when they come into reception, it's almost always a case of, oh, you need to make notes, you need to do a lot of observations, a lot of outside bodies come in to see that child. You don't tend to get any additional support for those children. There's no EHCP plan in place at that point because they're too young and there's a huge waiting list. So usually you're sort of left to your own devices to work out what strategy works for those children, what doesn't. It's a lot of trial and error. And then they move up to year one and across the school, and suddenly they've got a plan, or they've moved to a special school, or they've got additional support, which was not provided in early years. So you're left to do all the like underlying work, set the foundations, and then they're gone and you don't seem to get any of that support. Um, so I think early intervention is something that really needs work within the early years. If a child needs support, they need support. And I understand with budgeting costs and all these other factors that play into it, it does impact that. But the child needs support from day one, not when they go into primary. It's from the early years. And the earlier you can help them, the better it is for the child. It should be the child that's put at the forefront, not costs, things like that. And the last thing I will say is resourcing can be quite limited. So obviously children have their own interests. Some children can have a vast variety of interests. So like I've heard children taking interests on mini beasts that I wouldn't even know about, or bugs and things like that that I wouldn't even know exist. So often resourcing can be quite limited. You end up spending a lot of time making things in your own time or finding things in your own time, and like time constraints in that aspect can play a part. But yeah, resourcing in terms of things within the classroom, even for children to use in order to achieve their early learning goals, can be quite limited. So yeah, you're left to your own devices to fund that, or buy things yourself, or make things in your own
Mhm.
time. So those are my four things
And
that I
and
would say
and
are challenges.
and is that purely because you have to follow the lead of the young person. You have that child, you have to take on board their interests, and it's kind of interest-led learning. Is that the
Yeah.
reason why?
So it's because it's interest-led learning, but also it's because some children learn visually, some need practical, they need to have that practical element where they learn through their play. Some can learn by you showing them things on the board or talking to them about it. But for the ones that need that practical aspect where they are exploring it on their own terms during their free flow choosing time, finding resources for that can be quite difficult. Like if it's something like dinosaurs, you're fine because you have the resources within the school. It's a topic that runs almost every year. Same thing with things like fairy tales. But if a child's got a very unique interest in a very specific thing, and you're following that interest to try and get them to hit their early learning goals and try and get them more engaged within their learning, it can be quite difficult. I've had to make like planets. Like this year, my colleagues and I actually made planets out of balloons. Where you can do paper mache balloons and then paint each planet. We've done that rather than buying it to try and actually get the children involved in that element of learning. But even resourcing, I find some of the most basic resources that you get are so expensive now. Even when you look on the education websites, like to buy resources, it's huge. It's a huge cost that you'd think I'm going to make it myself, or I'm going to make it with the children instead.
Absolutely. I think there's so much there, actually. There's so much stuff that we haven't even, I certainly haven't thought through until you've made mention of them.
Yeah.
And I think the overlooking part, I think, just hurts because actually, if you weren't overlooked, that sharing of resources that immediately would alleviate that pressure. If people see, because in year 4 they do, or I don't know, year 5, where they start looking at planets and so on and so forth. So there probably are the resources around the building. It's just it hasn't been shared. So actually that's something to think about there in terms of like the communication between phases, how to share all that. But I also think in terms of the special needs aspect of things, like in terms of like during your time, you said you started in 2014 and you've been through various year groups and so on and so forth, and having learners that are coming through that are working towards being assessed for an EHCP. And you're trying to gather information and trying to support that process because you can see all the family have shared that they'd like to go down the assessment route, and you're being supportive and all that, no doubt. Have you had any training in that, like in terms of your own ECT or NQT years, or was that part of your training? I don't really know how primary sort of trainings work. Is that something
I would say now there's more scope for it, and there is a bigger focus on providing training for autism, ADHD, even things like trauma, which doesn't necessarily come under special needs, but there's so much training out there. But each child you get coming in through that door, if they've got a need of some sort, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll fit in that exact box. Some children come with various needs, and you end up like you could be given all the strategies, but if they're not suited to that child, then what's next? Like what is it you do? There's only so much you can trial and error as well, and if it's not working, then what? Sometimes you need to be shown how.
Yeah, and they're just still so young. They are just so brand new to a school and the system, and there's so much change. It's actually quite hard, no doubt, to identify, is this part of their need? Is it because of transition? Is it because it's new? Is it because of trauma? It's just too many variables, no doubt. So to be able to pinpoint that and actually be really specific in thinking about how to get to an endpoint or a specific strategy, you have to go through that sort of process. But that could take 3 terms.
Yep.
A long
Definitely.
journey, and you probably have all the time that you work trying to support.
And I totally agree about that trauma-informed element of it as well. I think that is just so important now, especially with the mental health crisis that is happening across the board, and especially like with all of the the refugees coming over from war-torn countries. There is a significant amount of trauma attached to that, and it's really important that we recognize that the work that we do has to be consistent. So if you're working with a young person in early years and you know that they've been through difficult life experience at such a young age, things have happened in their lives which are out of their control, and they've been put into circumstances that are really difficult. how how do we ensure that there's like that continuity in support from what you do? Maybe you do some element of trauma informed practice, but then that continuous support is needed when they move
Mm,
on from early years, isn't it?
mm. I'm going to give you an example. Like, I won't identify the child, but the child came from a war-torn country, displayed signs of autism, ADHD, did not non-verbal as well, so there was no language. English was not the first language either. So it's like you could be given all the training, but what is it that that child needs in that time? Is it support for the trauma? Is it support for the hyperactivity? Is it support for how to build a routine and be able to stay in the setting? What aspect do you focus on first? That's what I feel like training needs to steer or be geared towards, because it's almost, I feel like any training I've ever had on autism and ADHD and the rest, it's almost like this is a box. All these children fit in this box. This is how you need to work it. But some children have so many needs, or additional needs all in one, like ADHD and autism and speech issues. So it's like, what about them? What is it you start with? What aspect do you focus on first?
Yeah, definitely. Um, okay, so that is, I mean, there's probably so many more challenges and things moving forward as well, I think, because
Yeah.
there's been isn't there a new framework that came out recently around early years, and there's been a kind of like a focus on early years recently, hasn't there been, from
Yes.
Ofsted? So what challenges do you are you facing with regards to that?
Like I feel like certain changes within that framework were necessary, but I still feel like it does not account for children with additional needs to the extent that it should. It's almost always said that, oh, if they're not meeting those needs, just go back a step. But it's like if you're going back from reception to nursery, where do you go before that? Like there's not enough scope around it, not enough conversation around, okay, if a child is in reception and you're going back by the nursery assessments, what about if they're not even meeting that? Where do I go? What do I look to if they're not even meeting the nursery objectives? Do I go to 0 to 3? What if they're not meeting that? So then what am I, if they're in my setting, is what I'm doing appropriate for them? Is the
Mm,
sort of activities and all the planning and the differentiation and everything I'm planning according to their needs? If it's not even suited to them with all the changes I'm making, what is it I'm to do then?
yeah,
How
that's
can I assess them accurately?
Yeah. And the thing is that that is so vital at that stage, because what you want to do
Yeah.
is, they're kind of moving on to a formal kind of classroom environment when they move into that in
Hmm.
year 1, year 2, and things, and you want to make sure that you kind of have set them up in the
Hmm.
best place possible, in order to
Yeah.
make sure that there's that continuity element, whether it's
Yeah.
the trauma, whether it's the specific educational needs, whether it's certain early learning goals
Hmm.
met, not met, mastered, are still in the process of attaining. But if you're constantly looking to reassess and think, okay, right, where do I start now with these young people? By that time, I don't know, how long does that process take in terms of the assessment, and then you recognizing that actually, yeah, this young person has got that mastered, that learning goal
Yeah.
mastered. Now they can move on. So it must be a time frame in which you assess those young
Hmm.
people. By that time, they've probably got to a stage where they're leaving you.
Yeah. And like it's almost like I always think like these children always stand out to me. The ones that really struggle with reception, they're not meeting the objectives or the early learning goals, and then all of a sudden they're put into year one where they've got complete structure. How would they cope with that?
Mm,
It's almost like they didn't cope with the lack of structure in reception, the freedom of following their own interests, and now they're put into a year group where it's all structured and it's all timetabled. How would a child cope with all of that?
I
yeah.
find that really interesting, Mary, because as you were speaking, I was thinking actually maybe the structure would help them. How interesting is that? I've just,
Mm.
as you're speaking, I was like, maybe because it is just a lot. And
Yeah,
if you're coming from, and just to offer the other side of the coin, there's a lot that you've come from. Let's say if we're thinking about child X that's come from a place where they have seen awful things, and they are now in a new country, learning a new language, new mannerisms and systems and teachers and it's almost too much to cope with.
Yeah.
And it's just all too new, and they're just trying to navigate the moment, but the
Yeah.
moment is changing. And I think actually, especially when we're thinking about learners that have additional needs, sometimes that structure offers that clarity, because it supports them in terms of the trauma that they may have had. They may have just up and left. They've left their loved, their belongings and people that they care about, and so on and so forth. So to have that structure and to know what's going to happen next offers some sort of reassurance. So as you were speaking before, I was like, that's really interesting. I wonder if it, and that was going to be, literally was going to be my next question, was, how has that your primary experience sort of differed from your early years experience? And actually, and you've been in the classroom, exactly, based on what your experience have been, have you seen that supported that, or has it really not? I mean, I'm absolutely genuinely fascinated.
So when I was in year one, last year, I found that the children that came up from reception with those gaps, it was a never-ending battle to try and overcome gaps and like fill those gaps. They're constantly playing catch up, those children. They're constantly trying to catch up with their peers. And you can give them all the structure, but what it actually ends up doing is overwhelming them. And then there's that huge focus that has to be placed on their emotions of like why they're feeling overwhelmed. So that overrides everything else. So that was when I was in year one. When I was in year three, primary, same thing. I found um, children who struggled in early years. They moved into year one and year two. Those struggles continued, those gaps widened, whether it's with phonics or maths or just their confidence, even. And in year three, a lot of the time, the children that were in year three were working at year one level. So they're in that year group, but they're working at year one level. So it's like, do they ever catch up? You can do interventions, you can do things like reading recovery, phonics interventions, all these things, but are they actually ever really catching up to their peers? That's the question.
Do you know what? I'm on the other side of that. I work with young people who have actually left
Yeah,
mainstream education, right?
yeah,
So they've left for whatever reason, difficulties in their education setting, their needs not being met
yeah,
in the primary setting. Then that builds on lack of confidence, anxieties, all
yeah,
of those things, and it adds to the trauma. It adds to the trauma of not feeling a sense of belonging and or psychological safety, and maybe even feeling a sense of you know uh, dis, the like you feel disparity, you feel that disconnect with your peers. So I've worked with those young people, so I continue to work with those young people, and it's so true that they still, even and some like 13-year-olds who still will recall what happened to them in primary school.
yeah,
And they're
yeah.
14-year-olds, they will recall what happened to them when they were in year two, because it
Like
had
I look back at my experience and I still remember reception when I'm way older now, but I still when I think primary school, I think of year three because that was probably the best year. I still believe as a teacher now for primary year three is the best year to teach in. But I remember year three very clearly, and I also remember reception when I was in reception. Those are the only 2 years I have memory of. Other than that, I don't remember any of my schooling. And I remember how I was treated in reception, like how nurturing the teachers were. And I remember the things I learned in year three because they were of interest to me. But other than that, I don't recall anything else.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of block it out, and
Yeah,
yeah, I understand where you're coming from. But there are certain memories, if they're really awful, you can't block out. There was a
Yeah.
memory, one of my memories, which was I, where I ended up falling into the school pond.
oh
I will
no,
never, I never forget that.
How did you
no.
manage that?
It's a story for another time. It's a story for another time.
Oh,
Oh,
oh, oh,
okay,
oh.
right.
Is
So
it?
How old were you then?
I can't remember. I think I was in year four, I think. Um,
Oh,
yeah. Okay, right. We're moving on to a break. I hope you guys are enjoying our conversation with lovely Mariam, who's sharing all things early years. and we'll speak to you back after the break.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that 1 in 3 primary schools has no male teachers. The study by the Warwick Business School says the proportion of schools without a male classroom teacher has increased in the last 12 months. The report's author, Dr. Joshua Fullard, said this lack of male teachers was bad for pupils. Dr. Fullard is Assistant Professor of Behavioural Science at Warwick Business School. He went on to say that there is a large body of research that shows students benefit from being educated by a teacher with certain similarities to them. The report also found that schools in special measures are less likely to have a male classroom teacher. In total, the report found that 24.3% of all state schools in England had no male classroom teachers. The report called for teachers' pay to be raised by more than 10% and for a merit-based reduction in tuition fees for university-led teacher training to be introduced. Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy for ASCL Union, said more needed to be done to attract men and women alike, and a spokesperson for the DfE said the department wanted the profession to be inclusive. North East Child Poverty Commission website reports that new figures published by the DfE confirm that more than 3 in 10 pupils across the North East are now registered for free school meals. This is an increase from January 2022. It remains the highest proportion of any part of England. The figure of 30.4% is compared with 18.8% of pupils in the South East and 19.4% in the east of England. The England-wide rate is 23.8%. All regions have seen a significant increase in the number and share of children eligible for free school meals over the last 7 years. The Guardian reports children's enjoyment of writing has fallen to crisis point, following research completed by the National Literacy Trust. The charity says an alarmingly low level of children and young people enjoy writing. The research was conducted across the UK. 34.6% of young people aged 8 to 18 said that they enjoy writing in their free time. Although 3 in 4 children starting school said that they enjoyed writing, this dropped to 1 in 4 by the age of 16. The Children's and Young People's Writing Report is drawn from over 70,000 responses from children to the charity's annual literacy survey. The number of children who say they enjoy writing in their free time has dropped by 12.2% in the 13 years since the survey began. Young people do report that they write to improve mental health and well-being and to support causes or issues they care about. Full details can be found on the National Literacy Trust website. Finally, Microsoft News reports that Taiwan has made the move to use generative artificial intelligence, or AI, to help students learn English. Teachers in the country often report that students read and write better than they speak English, as shyness and a lack of practice can hinder oral communication. A new chatbot has been funded by Taiwan's Ministry of Education to help pupils get the practice they need. The Coolie bot allows pupils to speak person to AI and build up conversation on preset topics. It also assesses punctuation, accuracy and fluency. Taiwan has set a goal of becoming bilingual in Chinese and English by 2030. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to ask you a question. Do you use presentation software to help you deliver your lessons? 99% of you will be saying yes at this point. Have you ever considered how many presentations the average pupil in your school sees in a day, in a week, or even in their entire school life? Considering a typical secondary education, with a bit of rough maths, over a week with 5 lessons a day, there's potential to see 25 presentations. That's 100 presentations in just 4 weeks. I've left out any additional presentations like assemblies and visitors, etc. Working on a 38-week year, that's a whopping 950 presentations a year. That's a lot of presentations. Now, let's throw in some schools have a standardized slide theme and set layouts. Now we have 950 exactly the same lesson beginnings. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but do we really know what experience a pupil gets through a typical week in school? Are they being engaged, or are they being presented with the same visual stimulus day in, day out, simply causing them to fly below the radar? If you're like me, you're now thinking, how do I make my presentation stand out? Is there a presentation software out there that's better than all the rest? In my humble opinion, this is like the visualizer versus HD webcam argument. What works for some does not work for others because all subjects are not the same, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but please bear in mind that what works for one teacher may not work for another. A search for free presentation software returns no less than 24 apps I recognise. Some are interactive like Mentimeter, others have more dynamic transitions like Prezi. Most also have additional features and add-ons you can purchase. I know what you're saying, come on Steve, which is the best though? Well, the answer is simple, but I've run out of time, so I'll have to tell you next week. In the meantime, please consider the number of presentations a typical pupil is subjected to in your school. Does this need to change, or does it work? And how do you know? Do you have a preferred presentation software, and what are the features that make it stand out for you? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back. Okay, so Mariam, thank you so much for such an interesting conversation, and both through this show but also offline. It's been really interesting getting to know you and your journey. So what's next for you, and what work are you sort of aiming to do next?
So I will actually be working in, it's funny, I'm very passionate about the early years, but I'm going back into Key Stage 1 next year. I'll be working in Year 1 again. But I feel like what's next for me, I would never want to give up working with children and staying within the classroom. I'd always want to be within the classroom. But I do think I'm heading towards an MPQ in teaching and learning or special needs. And that's because when I did my master's, that um so a seed was planted for like an interest in special educational needs and the reform that it needs. And so I think if I was to pursue that, I would probably pursue an MPQ in special educational needs. And I was told yesterday that that is now available to do. So if the opportunity arises in my new setting, I would definitely take that up. I always joke though, because see, I was working at Heathrow and I didn't even want to do a degree at one point, and then I went from a degree PGC to a master's. I always joke, and my lecturers at my university always say to me, "So when are you coming back for the PhD?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." You know, it's always at the back of my mind, but when you haven't figured yourself out and you're like, "I'm not just going to do it for the sake of it." When that seed is planted fully and I can't get it out of my head, I think eventually if that door ever opens and I'm fully all for it, I would like to pursue a PhD. But at the moment, it's off the cards. But in the future, you never know.
Great. It's great to have those ambitions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing, sorry, I wanted to add is I am, so I completed the masters. One thing I am also interested in is working at university. So going into helping other people progress into becoming a teacher or like early careers teachers and EYFS teachers specifically. So hopefully if that door opens as well, I'll be heading that way. But at the moment, I'm teaching, I'm happy teaching, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
That's
Great.
lovely.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Mariam, for sharing all of that. And we're coming to the end of the show. It's been such
Yep.
a pleasure getting to know you, talking to you. You've really
Likewise.
given us, yeah, really given us an insight into early years. And I'll be honest with you, yeah. You know, sometimes you naturally like have certain tendencies to like about certain, like you were saying earlier, overlook certain sectors. For me, I was like,
Yeah.
I've never been sure about early years, but honestly, the way you're talking about it and your passion about it really has given me great insight into the way early years functions and works and the different challenges. But it also provides me with information that, you know, actually it's like something which we should not, we shouldn't sideline it. We should really harness, and that's what the show is about, harnessing those early years. They are so crucial, and you really explained that and really well. And I'm sure our listeners, you know, are really inspired by everything you said and your journey.
Yep.
So just to end off
Yep.
our interview with you, what top tips or insights would you like to share with our listeners around early years, and for anyone who wants to join?
So I'll start off with around earlier. So I think there needs to be, for the future, there needs to be a mutual understanding between early years and the primary sector. So usually early years and primary sector are one because they're part of a school, but I feel like there needs to be a mutual understanding of what each phase entails. So there's that, there's that, how I was saying, there's that misconception that, oh, all you do is play and babysit. And that's not true. I feel like anyone in primary who's curious should actually come and see what early years staff do. The physical demands of early years is a lot. It's physically very demanding. You're inside, you're outside, you're constantly on the move. There's no time to sit and just take a breather. You're constantly on the go. And I also feel like it works both ways. So a lot of early year staff, whenever they hear about year 5 or year 6 or key stage 2, they're always like, oh, I'll never go there. It's too hard. Oh, that's beyond me. I would never be able to do that. So I think equally they should be a bit more open-minded about what key stage 2 would be like. Maybe spend some time there, see what it is actually like. We've all been through the school process. We've made it through. So you never know. You don't know until you try. So I'll just say to be a bit more open-minded and to give it a go. Um, what else? I'd say for anyone who wants to go into an early years, I'd say be open-minded. Um, there's a lot of room for creativity. So if you're creative and you love that element of, the aspect of being able to make things and teach in a lot of different ways, you'll love it. One thing I will say, is, I feel like every teacher, when they start off, there's that idea of, oh, I want to help all children and I'm going to give them the best and I'm going to nurture them. Sometimes you have to be realistic with how much you can do, because you don't want to end up getting disheartened with how much you end up doing based on the child's circumstances or outcomes and things like that. So just um sometimes you have to see the reality of the school that you're working with, really get to know the vision of the school that you're in. Does your vision align with theirs? Do you match on a lot of things? Are your principles the same? And really choose the school that you work for carefully, because you spend a lot of time there. So choose wisely. That's what I would say.
Couldn't have said that any better. That is incredible, and I think you're absolutely spot on in all that you've shared today, and quite rightly so. It's we spoke about this offline, which is about everyone has a hand in this. So it's
Yeah.
having the nursery right through to early years, primary, infant, and then junior, and then secondary and post 19. So that thread, that golden thread, has to be there. And it has to be finding that time to cross collaborate, to communicate, and to give each other the same respect, because we're all there for the same reasons. We want the best for these young people, and so to always have the heart of it. So maybe find these opportunities to do that, and if listeners do want to come and visit schools and so on and so forth, I'm sure we will be thinking about how we can bring these things together as well. So that's really, really interesting. But thank you so very much, Mariam, for being such a wonderful
Thank you
guest.
so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's been great talking to you both. It was so easy to talk to you both.
Thank you so much, Mariam. And we're going to move on to our third and final break. and we're going to say our goodbyes to Mariam, and we hope to chat to you soon. Take
Thank
care,
you so
Mariam.
much for having me.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Thanks.
Very well.
Bye.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports that 1 in 3 primary schools has no male teachers. The study by the Warwick Business School says the proportion of schools without a male classroom teacher has increased in the last 12 months. The report's author, Dr. Joshua Fullard, said this lack of male teachers was bad for pupils. Dr. Fullard is Assistant Professor of Behavioural Science at Warwick Business School. He went on to say that there is a large body of research that shows students benefit from being educated by a teacher with certain similarities to them. The report also found that schools in special measures are less likely to have a male classroom teacher. In total, the report found that 24.3% of all state schools in England had no male classroom teachers. The report called for teachers' pay to be raised by more than 10% and for a merit-based reduction in tuition fees for university-led teacher training to be introduced. Julie McCulloch, Director of Policy for ASCL Union, said more needed to be done to attract men and women alike, and a spokesperson for the DfE said the department wanted the profession to be inclusive. North East Child Poverty Commission website reports that new figures published by the DfE confirm that more than 3 in 10 pupils across the North East are now registered for free school meals. This is an increase from January 2022. It remains the highest proportion of any part of England. The figure of 30.4% is compared with 18.8% of pupils in the South East and 19.4% in the East of England. The England-wide rate is 23.8%. All regions have seen a significant increase in the number and share of children eligible for free school meals over the last 7 years. The Guardian reports children's enjoyment of writing has fallen to crisis point, following research completed by the National Literacy Trust. The charity says an alarmingly low level of children and young people enjoy writing. The research was conducted across the UK. 34.6% of young people aged 8 to 18 said that they enjoy writing in their free time. Although 3 in 4 children starting school said that they enjoyed writing, this dropped to 1 in 4 by the age of 16. The Children's and Young People's Writing Report is drawn from over 70,000 responses from children to the charity's annual literacy survey. The number of children who say they enjoy writing in their free time has dropped by 12.2% in the 13 years since the survey began. Young people do report that they write to improve mental health and well-being and to support causes or issues they care about. Full details can be found on the National Literacy Trust website. Finally, Microsoft News reports that Taiwan has made the move to use generative artificial intelligence, or AI, to help students learn English. Teachers in the country often report that students read and write better than they speak English, as shyness and a lack of practice can hinder oral communication. A new chatbot has been funded by Taiwan's Ministry of Education to help pupils get the practice they need. The Coolie bot allows pupils to speak person to AI and build up conversation on preset topics. It also assesses punctuation, accuracy, and fluency. Taiwan has set a goal of becoming bilingual in Chinese and English by 2030. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to ask you a question. Do you use presentation software to help you deliver your lessons? 99% of you will be saying yes at this point. Have you ever considered how many presentations the average pupil in your school sees in a day, in a week, or even in their entire school life? Considering a typical secondary education, with a bit of rough maths, over a week with 5 lessons a day, there's potential to see 25 presentations. That's 100 presentations in just 4 weeks. I've left out any additional presentations like assemblies and visitors, etc. Working on a 38-week year, that's a whopping 950 presentations a year. That's a lot of presentations. Now, let's throw in some schools have a standardised slide theme and set layouts. Now we have 950 exactly the same lesson beginnings. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but do we really know what experience a pupil gets through a typical week in school? Are they being engaged, or are they being presented with the same visual stimulus day in, day out, simply causing them to fly below the radar? If you're like me, you're now thinking, how do I make my presentation stand out? Is there a presentation software out there that's better than all the rest? In my humble opinion, this is like the visualizer versus HD webcam argument. What works for some does not work for others because all subjects are not the same, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but please bear in mind that what works for one teacher may not work for another. A search for free presentation software returns no less than 24 apps I recognise. Some are interactive like Mentimeter, others have more dynamic transitions like Prezi. Most also have additional features and add-ons you can purchase. I know what you're saying, come on Steve, which is the best though? Well, the answer is simple, but I've run out of time, so I'll have to tell you next week. In the meantime, please consider the number of presentations a typical pupil is subjected to in your school. Does this need to change, or does it work? And how do you know? Do you have a preferred presentation software, and what are the features that make it stand out for you? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
So, welcome back. We're going to share our thoughts with our discussions with Mariam, because actually, for us, it's been quite enlightening and actually invigorating
Absolutely.
to hear someone's passion, especially when it comes to early years, because not everyone really is that attracted to those early years. I know I wasn't. But actually the part that it plays in the lives of us, our children, the future generation is so important. And finding passionate practitioners and teachers who are willing to really go in and change and potentially change the lives of these young people, it's so important. We cannot highlight the importance of that. So, Krupa, what are your thoughts?
You're absolutely spot on when you say, it's the foundation. It's the foundation of one, isn't it? And I think, when I sat back and reflected upon that reflection and speaking with yourself and Mariam, I thought it actually starts before birth. It starts from the time that a female conceives, and that education, that learning to support that journey is really quite important. And where that stemmed from was actually, I was thinking, what defines early years? So I was thinking, you have a newborn, and mum, the mother and father or carer, guardian, whatever, the caregivers of this young, beautiful being they're going through a lot. They've just changed, they've transitioned, they've got this new wonderful being, and you're trying to maneuver all of that. But actually, learning happens from that moment from the time the arrival of that young person comes through into this wonderful world. And you think, about feeding, and you think about nutrition and how much importance there is placed on that. And then I was thinking, well, actually, I wonder why that is, the physiology around that. And actually, there's, up until the age of 8, we know that the human brain still isn't fully developed by the time they're 25, but 8 is really important and crucial years around brain development and thinking about the architecture of the brain, it does really begin from birth. And so there's experiences between birth and when they access some form of formalized setting, for an academic sort of or an experience, nurseries and childminders and all these wonderful things that are available. They almost tap into getting ready for what's going to happen at school, because there are some really clear systems that the young people need to go through. So I think that for me, I think it's, do we have enough placement and time? I know they've got the Five to Thrive model and so on and so forth, but is there enough education for soon to be parents around those early moments between 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, and all that? And then are we equipping them, and are they being identified early enough? Because we've seen data around reading, for example, and vocabulary. The sooner we begin that, the greater chance of young person being able to be able to access those sort of skill sets. It then made me think about the major areas of child development. So you think about motor development, cognitive, social, emotional. Again, starts from birth. So although we're talking about early years, that's almost like the second stage. You've got, from birth to when they start a formalized setting. Then you've got from school age growth, and then you've got key stage 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth, and life that happens between all of that. The other element that I was really interested in, when she made mention of this route to purpose idea and this idea of assessment, and it made me think, well, actually, there are so many schools of thought in the pedagogy around early years. So you've got, Montessori and the Reggio, and you've got, Waldorf, and various different types of thinking. But fundamentally, it's about the 7 areas of development and how they're being assessed. But the quality is actually the most important element. The quality of that assessment is going to really will be passed on. So if you think about the learners that come through to you, for example, setting, you are taking all of that information from wherever they were, if they were in a setting, and then you're saying, right, how do I now make sense of this? What I'm reading and what I'm seeing, do they align? And what's the gaps that I need to support to fill that for the young person? So there was lots and lots of thinking. But in terms of assessment for me, I think I want to do some further thinking and reading around what the assessments are. So you've got the baselines now, why they are there, and what do they look like, and then what's the impact in terms of quality growth and meaningful use, because there's the other part of it which can actually encourage stress and so on and so forth. So you have multiplication tests and things like that in four, and SATs, and we've heard recently about how difficult those SATs questions were, and you think at such a tender age where their brains are not fully formed, where they haven't had maybe the consistency, are we really doing that well enough, considering now that we know we do have really passionate practitioners like Mariam? We are better informed around identifying special needs and alternative sort of strategies sooner. Is there more work around bringing that interconnected thinking around there? So those are my big sort of follow-on thoughts from that discussion.
My ones were linked around, I think, something that you touched on and something that Marion touched on, which is around how vital those early years are, how creating really positive experiences in those early years is so important. Because if the young person misses out on early years, and I know this because I'm dealing on a day-to-day basis with young people who have missed significant chunks of their education from early years all the way through their primary education, and there's certain things that just hit home. Those learning behaviors that these young people may not have or practiced enough, the gaps in these young people's learning, which creates these really spiky profiles for the practitioners who work with them now. Then there's an element of that trust in educators and practitioners, because if they've had these checkered educational history or not had a really positive, good experience in early years, how that can affect their trust in educators and in adults who teach, like teachers and whatnot. And that's probably the same for parents as well. And the impact on the later years, the anxiety, the confidence, the lack of confidence, all of these things which Mariam spoke about before as well, they can have a real impact on that young person's capacity to engage in learning.
Absolutely.
And so therefore what we would need to be doing is, in a way, capacity building for these young people. It's so important. The same way we look to capacity build for ourselves. I think my final thoughts in terms of the early years and the importance of investing in that element was to do with making sure that we have passionate people like Mariam who are willing to go in and love working with those younger people and take their passions further, engage in further reading, engage in further studies like Mariam wanted to, just to make themselves a better practitioner and just to increase and enhance their knowledge, because that can really have a significant impact on your skill set and your capacity as a practitioner. And there's that element of that flex and creativity and that responsive teaching that needs to happen in early years. And I know, for example, like with me, I started gaining that kind of responsive teaching, confidence in responsive teaching a little bit later, when I had deeper knowledge and understanding of who I was working with and the curriculum and things. I'm a really big fan now of responsive teaching and responding to the learners in the moment, rather than following like a set lesson plan. Make the best of any sessions you have with young people, pick up on those aha moments and then use that to lead the discussion. And when you have a toolkit, and when you're passionate about what you do, then you can do that. You can be responsive to those to the learning in that moment and to what the students are experiencing at that moment. So those are my important things, but I just think it's wonderful that we've got people like Mariam. So, moving on now, we are going to be moving on to our I Wish I Knew Earlier. This time, Krupa, you're going to be sharing with us. What did you wish you knew earlier? We still haven't come up with our drum roll or theme tune for that.
Oh, no, we must, shouldn't we? Put a little jingle for that. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll work on that. Alrighty, so I'm going to change what I wish I knew earlier to what I wish I did earlier, just for this week. Okay, I know we're sort of deviating a little bit, but I think I felt inspired by Mariam's passion, and I wish that I had exposed myself to such practitioners and such phases. So while I feel really confident with understanding adolescence and beyond, right up to 25, I think actually I do understand primary, but I don't have the same experience. And I think there is some validity in that. I was reading podcasts, radio shows like ours are absolutely brilliant sources of information, but it's being down on the ground, being operational, being there and being part of that. And I think what your final thoughts were actually rings true to what I wish I did earlier moment, which was build a connection with these young people sooner. I never found a reason to do that. I know they existed. I know that they happened because I obviously went to primary school, then they came to me in secondary. But actually, I wish I had made a conscious effort to be in those learning spaces and see how it all operates and see how connection works. And actually, only now as a mother that I've thought about the quality of the practitioners that we talk about, thought about what are their apprenticeship courses, what are they doing, what's the quality like around that, because that's my child in there, and because it's my child, I want the very best for her, them. So I had to think about it with a different lens, if that makes sense. But as educational practitioner, before having my children, when I started, I really, really wish I had sort of taken my nose out of what I was doing at that point in time, because that's all I had capacity for, but actually spread my wings a little bit and networked and actually got into where I could, into early years reception, key stage 1, 2, a lot more. I think that would have really offered some information sooner.
I think that's quite good actually for any ITT providers out there to recognise the importance of, coming out of that phase and just experiencing other phases. I think that, you just don't know which way your life is going to go later on. There are a lot of people that go into secondary, they move into primary, a lot of people that go into primary, they move into secondary, because they think they will work better with those kids, those young people. But actually those decisions are made a lot sooner. If anyone who's learning to be in the education sector, if they experience other phases.
Agreed.
And no phase and no sector within education is without its challenges.
Agreed.
Like Mariam, she went through a whole load of challenges that the early years sector phases. But if we had a primary teacher on or a secondary teacher on, they would say the same thing. They would talk about all the kind of similar-ish of issues that they may face within their phases. So no part of the sector is without its problems and without its challenges.
Yeah, agreed.
But actually understanding what we do in each other's phase will help bridge that, which would help make our contributions more meaningful, would help be a force for change and a force for good.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so we're moving on to our final moments of the show. We've got a few minutes left, and we always end our Sunday show with a Serenity Sunday moment. So today I'm going to be sharing my Serenity Sunday moment. And do you know the way I come up with these is sometimes I just come up with someone may say something which just triggers something in me and think, oh, how is this relevant to my life? Or it just creates like a shift in my thinking. And I don't know where this came up. Maybe it was in a podcast I was listening to, or maybe it was even on YouTube or something. But the word checks and balances came up. And I thought, checks and balances. And I think it's when I'm going through something in my life, I just, that is such a really good concept. Because obviously there's a legal definition of what checks and balances is. But actually I thought, hang on, there's a different perspective on checks and balances. And that, those checks and balances in life exist to ensure that we create a balance in our lives. And that could be family, that could be friends, that could be the staff we work with, the students that we serve, even the hobbies and the personal interests we may have. All of those things give us these checks and balance moments. And so when we're busy spinning our 15 plates, minimum 15.
At least, I was just thinking
or
that.
Or our 20 balls, juggling our 20 balls in the air, or we're busy people pleasing, or we allow negative people, negative thoughts, or any kind of negativity to enter our space, those checks and balances need to be in place for us to then find our true balance. And unless we utilize and use these checks and balances, which are naturally part of our life, we won't be able to balance our time, our energy, and our resources. So once we have found that healthy equilibrium in life through the utilization of, is that word, utilization?
Yeah, it is.
Utilization of those checks and balances. I'm always checking with you when I was saying the word. Then we begin to function better, we begin to feel better, and we're rewarded with more deeper, meaningful work and relationships. So then that will help us to burn brighter rather than burn out.
Oh, lovely. That's a lovely end. Brilliant. We'll take that on board this week, Nazya. I'm going to, I think what I will do is actually check out. I'm going to check out for a bit, I think, and then that would to enable me to just get that the big areas of balance in my world a bit more aligned. So, and I do often do that when I check out. It's not because I'm not interested or I'm just absolutely emotionally drained. I'm having to sieve through all that. So I think I'm at the point of checking out. This idea of checking and the checks and balance is absolutely stunning. So let's reflect back on that in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is a message for me over and above any message that I give to anyone else, because I have got checks and balances in my life, and I need to really keep them there, and keep and refer to them and make use of them. And so it's a message. It's a big message for me as well. So not just for our listeners. I hope everyone has enjoyed our show and you've gained something meaningful from it. I'm hoping that one of the overriding things that has that we've shared is about the importance that early years plays in our lives, in the lives of young people that we teach, and that it's really important that we pay attention to it.
Absolutely, and not to lose sight of the why. So the future generation, the next big thing that we need to, carve our time for. So it's starting from the beginning, and seeing where it takes us. Okay, so on that note, we are going to wish each of you a wonderful, warm weekend. We hope that you are going to check your own checks and balances, as Nazya has suggested this week. And we've also some really exciting guests coming up, so stay tuned. Don't forget to keep following us, and we'll be back.
Have a good weekend, guys. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.